so we can see what's on there.
Okay, let me just open it up first.
Fiona, the recording has just gone out today, so you didn't miss it. Patty will share the link, I am sure.
Can you see that?
So I was just saying for anyone who's joining now, if you did get your site up on your GitHub pages and you're feeling brave and you want to share it with the group, I would love to see it. So do share the URLs if you have them. Can't share. I'm muted, thank you. I was just saying, maybe try another browser. If Chrome isn't letting you share, maybe try, have you got Edge or Firefox or Safari installed? If not, we can try again at the end of the session if it's not happening for you. No other brothers about it. Okay. We'll try at the end because I think today's session isn't going to take the full 2 hours. So maybe at the end we can do a load of debugging. So welcome everybody who has joined. Today we are starting on an introduction to JavaScript. The last 2 weeks we've looked at HTML, we've looked at CSS. As I mentioned, if you have got your website, your portfolio site up on GitHub, I would love to see what you've made. If you're feeling brave, do share the URL in the chat. I would love to see it and share it with everybody else. Hosting. I'm not, oh, I see. I'm not sure how, I don't have the rights to stop you hosting. Your site just has lorem ipsum, that's fine. What I was looking for is if you've done any fun design bits to it or you've changed the colors. Yeah, I would love to see. So, like I mentioned, we are going to be starting JavaScript today. So let me get my screen share going. And I will share the slides out, of course, at the end of the lesson. But let's talk about what JavaScript actually is. So JavaScript is a programming language, and it allows us to build more complex features into our websites. So anytime you're looking at a web page that does more than just display static content, which is what we've built so far, so content that doesn't have any extra functionality, it just is, you can read it. So anytime anything does more than just display some static content, it's quite likely that there's some JavaScript behind it. So we're talking interactive features like live updates with new data coming in, new content coming in, interactable maps, playing sounds, 3D graphics. These are all things that can be powered with JavaScript. And if we were to think of the web as an onion, and we sort of visualize the layers of the web, this is kind of how we would see it. So at the very middle of the onion, we have the actual physical components. So the computers, the wires, the electricity that makes up the actual physical internet, all of the computers that are connected to the internet. Then we have what is called the Transmission Control Protocol and the IP protocol. So that's TCP/IP. And that is just a set of rules that govern how computers communicate with each other across a network. And it is therefore the set of rules that explain how data is sent across the internet. Then for the web specifically, we have HTTP, which is the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is just another set of rules which allows your browser to fetch HTML, CSS, images, videos, and it's built on top of TCP/IP. So anytime you hear the word protocol, it's just a set of rules that explains how two devices communicate with each other. So we've got the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and we've got the Transmission Control Protocol, and we've got the Internet Protocol. Then on top of that, we have the HTML itself, which, as we mentioned in the last few weeks, is the content of the web. So it's the structured text. And of course, we've already had a look at what that looks like. And then on top of that, we have our CSS, which is what we use to style our HTML to make it look good. And then finally, on top of that, we have our JavaScript, and you'll often see it written as JS. And this is what is going to add the extra functionality to our HTML and our CSS. And there's a lovely talk by Jeremy, who is Adactio. Let me get that link for you and share it in the chat. There's a lovely talk that he gave about the layers of the web. So if you want to read some more about this, you can do at that URL. And of course, I'll share the slides out so you can have the URL as well. And JavaScript was originally built to run in your web browser. And one of the real joys of JavaScript is that it's relatively easy to pick up in comparison to other programming languages. It was designed specifically to be accessible for everybody, so that everybody can start building things for the web. Because as we said at the beginning, when Tim Berners-Lee designed the web, he wanted it to be for everyone. He didn't want it to be a walled garden or a gated place. He wanted everybody to be able to just pick it up. And a lot of programmers sort of fell in love with this and started to port it onto other devices. So wearable devices like IoT devices can run JavaScript. Things in your smart home, like your thermostat, your doorbell. Quite a lot of cars also run JavaScript now. Even the International Space Station runs JavaScript. And because of this sort of ease to pick up and ease of use, JavaScript is one of the most used programming languages in the world. And because of that, it keeps growing and evolving as the problems that it is applied to change. And another lovely thing about JavaScript is we don't need to install expensive software to write it. We don't need to buy a license to use it. We don't need any specialized equipment, which is why it's become so popular, because anyone can just pick it up and give it a go. So we're going to have a look at some of the very fundamental building blocks of JavaScript today. And in programming tradition, the first thing that you do in any programming language is make it say hello world. So this is the first thing that we're going to do in JavaScript, and we're going to use something called a console log to do this. And the console is where you can see the output of your code. And if we open up our browser tools, let's see if we can do this directly in here. Can you see that? No, because I'm sharing the tab. Let me share my entire window. Hang on. There we go. So if I open up my developer tools, and then I click on the console here. So this is a bunch of warnings that are coming from Google Slides. So we're just going to clear all of those. And now I am presented with the console. I'm going to zoom in so you all can see that. And you can join along with me here. So what we want to do is we want to print hello world into the console. And thankfully, there's a built-in way to do this. And it looks like this. So we're going to type into our console.log hello world. There we go. And our browser has said hello world to us here. And when you're using console log and you want it to output some words, it's important that you put the text that you want it to output inside quotes, so inside a parenthesis. And you should then see the printed text that you gave it on the screen in the console. You might also be wondering why there's a semicolon at the end of the code. Semicolons are used at the end of every statement in JavaScript. And one of the lovely things that people say about JavaScript is it's very forgiving. JavaScript usually won't break if you forget your semicolon, but it's good practice to remember, partially for yourself, because it makes it easy to see where you've ended your statement. And it's just, it'll make sure that things don't act unexpectedly. So that's our console log. So what that has done there, this is the console, and .log is what we call a method on that console, and it allows us to output to the console. And we could put any text in there that we wanted. For example. Another important thing for us to learn, so console.log is going to become your best friend while you're learning JavaScript. Another thing that we need to learn is how to make a comment. And comments can be helpful for remembering your logic, giving yourself notes about what it is that you were doing when you were doing that code, and making your code easier for other people to understand. And to create a single line comment in JavaScript, we do it with 2 slashes. So a comment looks like this. We're going to go / with a comment. And you can see the text is in green because it's a comment. So it has no output. It does nothing. When I press enter, we just have a comment right there. And all of these rules, so the dot that we see here, the brackets, the quotes, the semicolons, the double slashes, are all part of what we call the JavaScript syntax. And syntax is a way in which a program expresses a concept. And the first concept that we're going to look at today is expressions. And expressions are something that you may well be very comfortable with if you've done any kind of high school maths. So expressions can be as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. That is an expression. And expressions are made up of variables, operators, and function calls. And we build up our programs by defining variables, by putting data in them, and by performing operations on them, and then storing the results. So we've got some examples here. If we take a look, we have some variables that we're giving a value. We have an operator here, and we are outputting the results of an operation. And if you've joined us for the last few classes, we've already used the word variable before. So let's have a look at what a variable is in JavaScript, because we've seen CSS variables. So how did JavaScript variables work? So variables need to be declared either before or at the same time that you use them. So a variable declaration is made up of a keyword, a variable name, and sometimes an assignment. And a variable declaration is a statement, so it ends in a semicolon. So if we take a look here, we have our keyword, which is let. Then we have our variable name, which is variable1, and a semicolon. So what we've done here is said, I'm creating a variable called var1. That's it. I'm going to use it at some point in my code. I'm not using it right now. This second one here, I'm using the keyword let, and I'm creating a variable called var2, and then I am assigning it. So this single equals here is the assignment operator, and var2 equals 2. I haven't used either of these variables yet. I have just declared them. When I then want to use them, I can just use the variable name. And that's what I would do if I was using it later on in my code. If I were to do this here, so I've created a variable that we haven't seen before, so value 2 equals 222, I haven't declared it anywhere, so my code wouldn't know anything about it, and it would do what is known as an explicit initialization. So let's take a look at what examples I've got here. Yeah, okay, let's talk about the different kinds of variables before we go into that. So JavaScript, as I mentioned, in order to define a variable, we need to use a keyword. So on the previous screen, we used let, but there's actually a few different keywords that we can use here. And keywords are words that have a specific reserved meaning in a language. So the keywords that we're looking at as far as variables are concerned are let, const, and var. And let is the keyword that you're going to be using most often, I imagine. And let allows you to create a variable that you can assign something to, but its value can be overwritten at some point in the future. So maybe you're going to update that value or change that value. You would want to use let as a variable. If you want the value to not be able to be overwritten when you're creating the variable, then you would use the const keyword. So const won't ever let you update or change the variable. You can only use it. So for example, you're setting some configuration data for your code that needs to not change. Then you would maybe use a const. And then we've got var here, which is kind of the old-fashioned way of declaring a variable. Until a few years ago, it was the only way to define a variable. So let and const actually are fairly recent. But I'm saying that it probably isn't actually that recent. It feels recent to me because I'm old. Yeah, let and const are the new way of doing things. Var is the old way of doing things. You will see var used in a lot of code that you start to work with on a project, and you'll see it in tutorials around the web. And most of the time, you can probably substitute let if you want to create a variable that can be changed later. But as far as we're concerned, while we're doing this course, we're mostly going to be using let and const. And if you see me slip into using var, which I will do occasionally, call me out on it and say, did you mean let or const? So let's have a go at declaring a variable with let, and then we're going to declare a variable with const, and then we're going to have a look at what happens if we try and reassign those variables. So you're all going to open up your console. So you do that with right click and then inspect, and then click on the console tab up at the top. And we are going to define a variable. So we're going to say let var1 equals 1, or you can call your variable whatever you like. Oh, and I forgot my semicolon. And then we are going to create another variable with a const. So we're going to say const, hello, const var2 equals 2. Got my semicolon again. And then what we're going to do is we're going to try and reassign. So if we say here now, var2 equals 5, we can't do that. We have got a uncaught syntax error. Oh, no, that uncaught syntax error is because I typed that wrong. Let's try that again. var2 equals 5. What we're actually looking for is an uncaught type error. There we go. Assignment to constant variables. So it's saying you're not allowed to do that. The computer is saying you can't do that. You can't assign a new value to a value that is constant and already has a value. And this is a really useful way of making sure that you don't accidentally overwrite things that shouldn't be overwritten in your code. So make sure you bear in mind whether or not you want a let or a const. And you can name your JavaScript variables pretty much anything that you want, as long as it doesn't contain a space. So we can use single words as good variable names. Usually you want to assign your variable to be descriptive of what it contains. So we wouldn't really use something like var1 or var2 if we were actually building something. We would say, I don't know, ticket cost or something like that, something that describes what it is that is being set. And if you want to have like a 2-word variable name, the way that we usually do it in JavaScript is we use this thing called camel case, where we start in lowercase and then the next word is in uppercase. And you might also see variables and numbers in JavaScript variable names. So something like variable2, numbers are allowed. Underscores and dashes are also allowed. So we call that snake case or kebab case, depending on which one you use. But the one that, oh, and emojis are also allowed for variables, not recommended, but allowed. But what won't work is using spaces. So what you've done here is said, let this, and you've created a variable called this, and then you've got a syntax error because JavaScript is saying, I don't know what contains or spaces are. So now we need to talk about what you can assign to variables. So we can assign, as we've already seen, we can assign numbers to variables. We can also assign strings to variables. So we had a look when we said hello world. I'm just going to make this a bit bigger so you can see it. The text inside of quotes is called a string, which is just a chunk of text, really. Then we can also assign booleans. And a boolean is a variable that can be either true or false. And we will look at those a bit more later. And the last thing that we can assign is an object literal. So something like this, where we have an object that can be something like, we have a cat whose name, we have an object called myObject, and inside myObject there is a cat name, which is Pickle. A better name for this might have been Pet rather than myObject, but there we go. So let's take a closer look at each of these. These are what we call JavaScript primitives, and we will have a look at a couple of other types as well, but these are the ones we're going to start with. These are our JavaScript primitives, so let's have a closer look at each of them. So hopefully you won't feel like I'm insulting your intelligence when I begin to tell you what numbers are. As we said earlier, you can assign a variable a number value, and this is basically just any number, including decimals, including integers, including negative numbers. JavaScript just has the concept of number. Then we have the ability to use our arithmetic operators on numbers. So anything that you would have seen from, you know, school maths, brackets, orders, division, multiplication, addition, subtraction. We can do all of that on JavaScript numbers. And we can, use any of our arithmetic operators. And these are the ones that you should hopefully recognize, and this is how you use them. So we could, let's create two variables. So in fact, we've got var1 equals 1 already. So let's say let var, we've already got a var2, let var3 equal 3. And then we can say var1, why don't we say var1 divided by var3, and we can see the console is already suggesting the answer to us, and if we press enter, then we get that answer. So 1 divided by 3 is 0.3. And if we wanted to do any of these arithmetic operators, we absolutely can do on those variables. The next thing that we spoke about was strings. So this is numbers. Hopefully this is nothing new to you. We all understand how numbers and maths work to lesser or greater extents. Let's talk about strings. So JavaScript strings are just a series of characters inside our double quotes or our single quotes. And a string can be, it could be any number of characters long. It can be a single character. It can, as I said, have single or double quotes. And different people prefer different things with regards to single or double quotes. And if you put your if you put your numbers rather in a string, then your mathematical operators will work differently to how you might expect them to. So let's create var4 for now, and that is going to be and then if we say let var5 equal, well, what do you think is going to happen if I say var4 plus var5? What do you think the output is going to be? Hello world, exactly. Colette, I've got it in 1. So let's just test that out. Hello world. And how about if we assign numbers to so let's create var6 equals 6 as a string. We'll say var7 I'm trying to create file looking over my microphone. We'll say let var7 equals 7. What do you think is going to happen if I now say var6 plus var7? $67 exactly. Because these are strings and not numbers. How about if we say var4 plus var7? So 7. How about if we say var4 plus var1, which we set to the number 1. Let's have a look, shall we? So var4 plus var1 is hello 1. And if we did var1 plus var4, let's have a look at what that might be. One hello. Yeah. So JavaScript, in a lot of languages, you wouldn't be allowed to, for example, add a string to a number or a number to a string, or it would give you an error in some way. But JavaScript's just like, I gotcha. I'm a guess what you wanted to do. And so it said, well, one of these is a string. I'm going to just make the other one into a string and add them together, which is kind of cool. Like we say, JavaScript is very forgiving. Okay, yeah. So that's our strings. Let's move on to our next type, which is Booleans. So a JavaScript Boolean represents one of two values. So a Boolean can either be true or false. And very often in programming, you're going to find that you need something like this. So either a setting is set to on or off, or yes or no, or true or false. And for this, we're going to use the JavaScript Boolean data type, which can only be either true or false. And we tend to use Booleans to express whether or not a logical statement is true. And we're going to have a look at logical statements a little bit later on. But for now, let's have a look at a statement like this. So we have created a variable called bool, which we have set to true, and another bool, which we have set to false. And then we can say, oh, this is just another example of using, okay, fine. So this is having a look at how we get a falsy value. So we could create let bool equal true. We could say let other bool equal false. Or we could do something like saying 4 is greater than 5. So this is our greater than operator. And of course, 4 is not greater than 5. So the console is telling us that is false. That is not true. And there are a whole load of other comparison operators which are available to us in JavaScript. So we had a look at our arithmetic operators. That's our plus, minus, divide, multiply. We also have our comparison operators. So let's take a look at those. So we have greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, and less than or equal to. And I always struggle to remember which way the greater than or less than signs go. The way that I personally remember, like a bunch of people were like, it's a alligator and the alligator eats the little one, and like that just does not work for me, because it could be eating it in that direction. The way that I remember is, so we have a shape that is like this, and this side is big and this side is small. So like big gap, small gap. So whatever is on the big gap side is the big number, and whatever is on the small gap side is the small number. So that is bigger than that. So that is greater than that, or that is less than that. Did I explain that at all helpfully? Does anybody else have a good way to remember which way round the greater than or less than signs go, or do you just find it easy to remember? Or do you have no opinion at all? So if we were to say, for example, read left to right starts off big, must be bigger than. Yeah, that's my thinking. So we start off with the big gap. So that's big, gotta be bigger than small. That's the small end, gotta be smaller than big. That's my thinking as well. I'm glad you agree, Colette. So we could, for example, create a I don't get the alligator one, just it doesn't make sense to me. The alligator that likes to eat the bigger number. I never thought about, I'm sorry, I've broken you. The alligator eating both ways. Like, yeah, because someone has to explain the alligator to me in a way that I can understand. Okay, I was going to make a demo. So we've got var1, which we know is set to 1. So we could say var1 is greater than var2, which is false, because we know that var1 is set to var2, or we say var1 is greater, that is true. Greater than or equal to, sorry, less than or equal to, that is true. Or greater than or equal to, we'll type this correctly eventually, there we go, that is false. So these are our comparison operators, and again, all of this is so dry, and I really apologize for the dryness of learning JavaScript. Once we start to actually build something fun, all of these things will start to make more sense, and they'll start to stick in your head in the same way that, you know, learning what HTML and CSS looks like at first is kind of like, oh God, why? Until we start to build things, and then it feels like it makes sense. You know, learning arithmetic operators and learning comparison operators all feels a bit intangible at the moment, but once we start building some apps, it'll all start to sort of fall into place. So don't worry too much if this feels a bit dry right now. Why does every let statement result in undefined? So that is your browser's way of just saying that there's no output, there nothing's happened. So what did I do? I did let var, I can't remember what we got up to, let var10 equal thread, and then we've got undefined. So undefined just means nothing, there is no output, nothing has been there, there's nothing to say here. So the next thing we should look at, we've looked at our assignment operator, which is our single equals, and we don't want to get that mixed up with our equality operators. And our equality operators check whether two things are equal. So far we've just been assigning things, we've been saying this thing is this thing. But if we want to check whether this thing is the same as this thing, we use our equality operators. And they will return a Boolean result. So is it the same or is it not the same? And JavaScript uses something called the abstract equality comparison algorithm, which if you want to read about it, you absolutely can do. If I was talking about it being dry before, this is getting really dry. You can read about it there. And what it does is it compares both sides of the operators, but without checking whether the types are the same. So in a lot of languages, equals will check whether or not a type is the same. So we could say in JavaScript, let's put it into our console, 5 equals 5. And JavaScript is like, yeah, they're the same. in a lot of languages, that would say that they are not the same. One is a number and one is a string. That can't be true. But in JavaScript, what the equals equality operator does is it checks and it does what is called type conversion. So it will take whatever the first thing that you are checking is, and it will convert the second thing to be the same type, and then check whether they're the same, which a lot of people, and rightly so, would say could cause some problems in your code, because you might not want the type to be changed when the comparison is made. And so to make sure that we don't fall foul of bugs, which would be caused by the number 5 being equal to the string 5, we use something called the strict equality operator, which is equals equals equals. So if I check 5 equals string 5, I'm going to zoom in again, you can see that came out as true. But if I do 5 equals 5, we can see that comes out as false, because this is the strict equality operator. So it's saying those aren't the same because they're two different types. So one is a number and one is a string. And you can try some of these out in your browsers. And you can use these operators to compare not only numbers, but strings as well. So we could check whether hello equals world. No, it doesn't. They're two different strings. That makes sense. We could check whether true, this is an interesting one. True equals true. True equals 1. That returns true. And false equals 0 also returns true. So you can see how you could fall into some quite difficult to find bugs if you're using the equals equality operator and not the strict equality operator. So most of the time when we're writing JavaScript, we're going to be using our strict equality operators. So our equals and our not equals. So this exclamation mark equals, or you might hear it called bang equals means not equal to. So we could say true is, that's a bad example, 5 is not equal to 4, and yes, 5 is not equal to 4. So we have spoken so far about numbers, strings, booleans. We've talked about different operators. We have made a point to not remember that your equality operators are not the same as your assignment operators. So that's an important thing to remember. The final thing that we haven't spoken about today is an object. And an object is some syntax that lets you assign a descriptive piece of data in your JavaScript. So you can think of objects as ways to collect data together. And in this example, we are defining an object literal. And this object literal has 3 properties on it. So this object is, we've given it the name of cat. So the variable name is cat. And then we have opened up these curly brackets here, which means we are making an object. And then when we want to assign a property, we use a property name. Is this like a struct in C? I don't know, because I don't actually know C. Somebody could answer the question, maybe. It may well be. So we can give it a property name and then a property value. So I've given this a property name of name and a value of pickle, a property name of legs and a value of 4, and a property name of cuteness and a value of 90%. So why don't we all have a go at creating an object ourselves? So I'm going to say, let cat equal, and then my object. And annoyingly, if you want to create a new line in your console, you need to press shift equals, and then it won't process it until you press enter. So sorry, not shift equals, shift enter to get a new line. So I'm going to make a, let's give it a name of path. And a number of legs is 4, thankfully, and the cuteness, considering she scratched my face earlier, I'm giving her a cuteness of 50% right now because we're not best of friends. And in the same way, when you are writing a list in English, you put a comma after each item, and then you don't put a comma after the final item. We do the same in JavaScript, and then we put a semicolon at the end of our expression. So I can now press enter, and I could say console.log cat, and it would output this nice object here, which I can then actually look at in the console. And we can also log just one of the properties if we want. So if I wanted to know what the cat's name was, I could say console.log cat.name, and it'll output puff. And we use this thing called dot notation to do that. And we've already seen an example of dot notation with our console.log, but now we also can see what is happening here. So we can say cat.name and we get the name property. And the interesting thing about constant object literals is that we can modify their properties as long as we don't try and reassign the entire object. So if I, for example, wanted to maybe forgive Puff for scratching my face, I absolutely could do, and we could modify the cuteness property on my cat. So I could say cat.cuteness equals 100%, because we all know that Puff is actually the cutest. And now if I console log cat, we can see that her cuteness has been changed to 100%. So we can modify properties on an object, and this works fine without creating an error. Hey, Joseph, welcome. What we can't do is because, no, let me start again with this explanation. So when I created my variable, I used let here, but if I'd used const, it would still work. So let me actually do all of that. So I'm going to define a new variable with a const, and I'm going to call it kitten. I have a const of kitten whose name is Puff, who has 4 legs and has a cuteness of 50%. And as we said earlier, we're not able to change consts. The whole point of a const is that it's constant. But interestingly, we can still make that change. So if I did kitten cuteness equals 100%, and I now try and console log our kitten, you will see that that value has actually changed, even though we've created a const. And what is happening here is that we're modifying its properties. We're not changing the object itself. And this is because what we're doing is we've created a reference to an object. So in this case, we've created an object called kitten, and that object is assigned to a certain bit of memory in your computer. So memory that the program is using to store your data. And you're not actually changing the location of that bit of memory, you are changing the properties that are assigned to the thing that is in that bit of memory. So it's a weird way to sort of, you're allowed to change the properties on an object that is a const, is basically what I'm trying to say. And it feels like it shouldn't be right, but it is. Because you're not changing the object itself, you're just changing the properties on the object. And do try it out in your browsers yourselves, don't just take my word for it. Try creating your own objects if you want. If you create a good or funny object, please share it in the chat. And as I said, if you want to type out an object, use Shift Enter to create multiple new lines inside of your console. So that is a very brief look at objects. And as I mentioned, JavaScript is brilliant. We love it because it's very forgiving. But because it's very forgiving, sometimes it does things that we may not expect it to do. And we've already had a look at some of these today. So we had a look at our hello plus world variables. That feels really tiny. Can you actually read that? So if we created a const called first and set it to hello, and a const called second and set it to world, and we join them together, we would get this output of hello world. And so if we wanted to add a space into it, we could add an actual space character using our plus, and then a space, and then a plus to say hello world. What we're doing here is called concatenation. So we're concatenating three things here. We're concatenating our two variables and a literal space inside of a string. And you can pretty much join together as many operations as you like in this way. And that is what we're doing when we are writing programs. We're mixing and matching variables and literal values, and generally anywhere you can use a variable, you can also use a literal value, and vice versa. And we can also use this kind of string concatenation to take the variables from our objects and make them into a sentence. So if we remember our little kitten from earlier, we could say something like console.log, I have a cat called, and then I could say plus cat dot name, take our kitten, and then we could say, and what are we going to say about her? And she is cat dot cuteness. And what we're doing here, if I press enter, hopefully I've got that sentence correct. Nope, missing. What have I missed? I missed a plus. So, and I got my spacing wrong. There we go. Let's try again. I have a cat called Puff, and she is 100% cute. Get there eventually. If, by the way, if you want to get back the thing that you just wrote in the console, you can press the up key to scroll back through the things that you just wrote, the previous commands that you wrote. And as you noticed, I made a lot of mistakes while I was writing that. This whole plus space syntax is just really frustrating, causes a lot of pain and errors, and it's easy to accidentally forget your spaces. So JavaScript offers us something called a template literal that we can write directly into our strings to make them a bit easier to read. And a template literal looks like this. So instead of doing this plus, quote space plus thing, quote space, words space, we can use this character here, which is called a backtick. And on my keyboard, the backtick is in the top left corner underneath the escape button. But on your keyboard, it might be somewhere else. That's what the backtick looks like for me. If anybody has a Mac and knows where their backtick is and wants to describe it to the class, that would be super helpful. So if we want to use that backtick, we can do like this. So we can say console.log. We use our little interesting left of the Z key on one person's Mac and top left key on somebody else's Mac. I guess it depends whether you've got an American or a UK keyboard as well. But yeah, you're looking for the little tiny tick key. So we're going to say backtick. I have a cat called, and then we're going to use the $sign and the curly bracket to insert our variables. She is $sign curly brackets kitten dot cuteness cute, and the backtick and the parenthesis semicolon. There we go. I have a cat called Puff. She is 100% cute. That was much easier to type than all the pluses and spaces and all of that. And we can add as many variables as we like, as long as we remember to surround them with this syntax here. So the $curly bracket syntax. I'm using Linux and my backtick is down below the escape key. Yeah, that's where mine is as well. I hope everybody has found their backtick. I ran this class once and somebody had copied the backtick character that I pasted into the chat and was just pasting it in every time because they couldn't find their backtick. So I hope you've all found your backtick. I hope you all had a go creating your own sentences with your own objects in the console. So now let's have a look at another gotcha, which is operations on different types. And we have had a look at this as well a little bit already. So we had a look at what happens when we add two strings together, when we add a number and a string together, when we do a comparison on a number and a string. So I'd like you all to just have a go now at trying some of these out in your browser in the console, and before you press enter, just have a guess what you expect the outcome to be, and then see whether JavaScript gives you the outcome that you're expecting. For example, true plus 1 is always an interesting one. So just try some of these out in your browser now and be truthful before you press enter. Have a good old guess about what you think it's going to be. I'll give you a little bit of time, and if anybody has any questions, give me a shout in the chat. And if anybody's brain feels like it's melting out of their ears, don't worry too much. We're going to make a super fun game in the next few classes that will hopefully consolidate a lot of these things, and we'll start to make them make sense. The string 1 plus the string 2 equals the string 12. Yep. JavaScript's good at maths. So that is a very quick introduction to the very basics of JavaScript. And if you do want to do some further reading, there is an absolutely excellent tutorial on getting started with JavaScript at this URL here, which I will share in the chat. I highly recommend working through this tutorial. If you've got some time this week, it's really great. I will share these slides out. Now we've finished and we have an hour to go still. So we have two options. We can move on and do some more JavaScript. We can, if anybody has any questions about anything, we can I can try and answer the questions. We can take a look, if you've got any bugs from the previous classes that you want us to take a look at, we can take a look at those. Or we could catch up on that last bit of CSS that we missed from last week's class. So I'm going to leave it up to a vote to the class. So would you like to, and the other option, of course, is we can also call it here, and we can pick this up again on Wednesday. So if you would like a quiet evening and you want to finish here and think about everything we've learned today, type quiet evening. If you want to start the next JavaScript class, type in JavaScript class. And if you want to continue with the CSS class that we didn't finish off the other day, type in CSS class. Or if you've got a question, just type in your question. HTML4 has a font tag if used alongside CSS, which takes precedent. I don't even know what the font tag does. Let's look it up. The font tag was used in HTML4 to specify font face, font size, and color, but then they haven't actually used it. I think the font tag might not even be, is the font tag even supported anymore? Not supported in HTML5, there we go. And you're asking specifically for HTML4 whether the CSS would take precedent. I would imagine the inline style would take precedent, but you know what? I don't actually have any clue. Why are you writing HTML4? I think would be my first question. Yes. Yes, HTML was very different before HTML5 came out, and thankfully, well, even before CSS came out, but thankfully we're not in that place anymore. We're in a much better place as far as learning HTML and CSS goes. Anybody have any thoughts on what they would like to continue? Any votes from Discord at all? So we've had one vote. Colette, is your vote for continuing with JavaScript, or is your vote for going to the CSS class and finishing off that? We had one tiny last bit to do where we were going to learn about positioning in CSS. Ah, yeah, that's what I like to hear. You've already done it. Okay, well, since we've got one vote for CSS, then I'm gonna jump into that. Let me first of all share these slides with everybody. So if you want to drop off now, if you're done and you don't want to learn CSS, that's absolutely fine. I will share the slides with you now. These are the slides from today's class. As I mentioned, I really do recommend working through that Node Girls introduction to JavaScript. It's a really nice, just step-by-step tutorial. So if you do want to work on your JavaScript between now and Wednesday, you absolutely can. Until then, though, let's quickly jump back into my CSS slides. Share screen. So we got all the way, let's jump all the way down to the bottom. So we got all the way to learning about our befores and our afters. And we made that the cute little triangle on the read more button. Let's find it. This is where we got up to. I'm just going to open up my editor and open up my workshop. Awesome. And so where we got up to, we put this little triangle in here. One thing we didn't do is put the big triangles on the bottom of each section, and this requires us to learn a little bit more CSS theory. So let's talk about that now. Where is my slides? There we go. So in order to add in that big triangle from the design, we're going to start off by adding a margin bottom to the about section, and we're going to create some space for that triangle. So we're going to push everything down by 100 pixels. So in your editor, if you open up your project, you're going to find the about section and put a margin bottom of 100 pixels on. And we are back to the fun of jumping between editors. How can I catch up with the portfolio creation? Ah, yes. Okay, let me get you the GitHub. So if you want to, it is here. I can give you, so we have the previous sessions were all recorded. So if you do want to work through them, you absolutely can. if you I'm going to call it named it. There we go. So if you want to, you can get all the code here. And I'm just going to go back to my browser very briefly. And what you can do here is you can download all the code yourself. So all we've really got is an HTML file and a CSS file that we've been working on. So you can directly download the code, or if you'd rather, you can fork it to your own GitHub repository. And if you name the GitHub repository your username.github.io, then it will automatically be hosted for you by GitHub, which is super cool. So you can go to your username.github.io, and you will see the website there. So that is where we are up to so far. I'm going to do the editing in the browser rather than swapping between the two, because this is it's super annoying. So let's do that. So my editor is going to look a bit different, for which I apologize. But I think it'll be easier than me constantly swapping between the two. So this is my in-browser editor, which is kind of cool. You can get to this, by the way, everybody, if you are using GitHub and you are on your GitHub repository, you can just press the full stop key and it opens up your repository in an online editor, which is super cool. So we're going to jump into our CSS here, and we are going to find that about section. Can you read that? No, I'm going to zoom in a bit. We're going to find our about section, and on our about section, we are going to add a margin bottom of 100 pixels. And then we're also going to do something called adding a position, which we've not looked at yet, which is position absolute. No, position relative. We're going to add position relative on to our about section. And we've not talked about position properties yet at all, so let's talk about those. These are going to be really useful to you in your web dev journey. So position allows you to manipulate the location of an element in your page, and the possible values for position are static, relative, absolute, or fixed. And there's also sticky as well, which for some reason isn't in these slides. We'll talk about sticky at another time. And by default, everything is position static, which means that when you put an item in your HTML, it'll render on the page in the order that you've written it in the HTML. And this is called the document flow. So elements appear in your HTML and they flow down the page as you add more elements. There are additional properties that can be added to a positioned element, which allows it to move either up, down, left, or right. And these properties won't have any effect when we're adding them to a static element. We can change our position to be relative, which is what we've just done with our about section. And relative elements stay in the document flow, so they will still be rendered in the order in which you've written them in the HTML. But now we can use top, left, bottom, and right properties to nudge it around the page if we want to. And we'll do an example of this, which will make this a little bit clearer. We also have the option of position absolute, and position absolute takes your item out of the flow of the page, as if and the other elements that you've written in your HTML will act as if that element didn't exist. So all the other things will close up to fill the gap of that element that you've just taken out of the flow. And then you can absolutely position that element anywhere on the page that you want it to go. And you can use your top, left, bottom, and right properties to move it around within the page. And your absolute elements are positioned inside of their relative parent. Again, we'll work through some examples of this because it feels so, this absolutely broke my brain the first time I tried to use it. And then finally we have fixed, and if an element is fixed, it's removed from the flow of the document and it is fixed on the page. It's almost as if you glued it onto your monitor, and even if you scroll the page, it stays where it is. So how is this going to help us to put a triangle in? Well, let's take a look at the design. So in my nice design, I had this sort of a diagonal shape, which we're going to turn into a triangle. So we have our about section, and then we're going to add in an after to that, and we're going to add in a triangle shape. And this triangle shape that we're going to add in is actually going to be pushed outside of the about section. So we're going to put it at the bottom of the about section, and we're going to move it down by 100 pixels. So it's actually outside of the about section. So let's try that now. So our about section is our relative container, and our about after is going to be an absolutely positioned little triangle that we put in there. So let's build that now. We are going to use our after, and we're going to make a new pseudo element. So let's jump into, where's my code? Here it is. So after the about, we're going to make a new selector of an after, and whenever we're creating an after, we always have to add in a content property. Interestingly, just as an aside, these the CSS that we're writing looks a lot like our JavaScript objects, and we have properties and values on them. Just an interesting shape that you will see regularly as you learn more programming. So we're going to give this about a position absolute. We're going to give it a right of 0. So what we're saying there is we want this item, now that we've given it position absolute, we've taken it out of the flow of the page. So now I need to tell it where to go. So I'm telling it to sit to the right of the page, well, sit to the right of its container, sorry. And now we're going to tell it also to sit at the bottom of its container. And not only at the bottom, actually minus 100 pixels below the bottom of the container. We're going to then create a triangle, and I'm just going to type this out for you, but you could go to your triangle generator. So we're going to give it width of 0, height of 0, and then we're going to give it a border top of 100 pixels solid, and we're going to use our primary. And a border right of 100 VW. So remember, our VW unit is our viewport width. So we're saying it's going to be 100 pixels high, and it's going to be as wide as the viewport, and it's going to be solid transparent. This should create us a nice little triangle. I think I am going to have to close. If I commit that, is it going to update it for me in here? not tried before. No, that might just actually take time. I don't have the reason why I'm doing this, I don't have my live server in this online version of the editor. I don't actually know if there is a way from here to see. I don't think there is a way to see it rendered in the browser from here. So what I've just done is committed and pushed, and hopefully eventually it works your end. Awesome. Okay, so we have a little triangle, hopefully. And we can do the same to our contact section, which is further down the page. So I'd put a diagonal on the top of the contact section in the design, so we can add that one in as well. So why don't we do that now? Where's my editor? Here it is. So after all of our about, have we got a selector for contact? Yes, we do. Okay, so on contact, we're going to also give it position relative, and we are going to give it this time a margin top of 100 pixels. And then we're going to make a selector for the before pseudo element. And you all get to see how bad I am at typing without my VS Code hints. Remember our empty content, position absolute, and right of 0. This time the top is going to be minus 100. So we're saying we want it to sit at the top and then sit a little bit above the top. So 100 pixels above the top, width of 0, height of 0, bottom 100 pixels solid primary. Border left 100 VW solid transparent. Hopefully that will have created you a triangle at the top of your contact section. And there's a whole bunch of extra things that we could do in the CSS here. So we could go back and take a look at all the places where we've used what is called magic numbers. So numbers that feel like they're kind of plucked out of thin air. So where is it? I've used like the number 960 quite often. And maybe that could be a variable. 100 pixels is the size that I've decided for my triangle. Maybe that could be a variable. Max image size could be a variable. You want as much as possible to not use random numbers in your CSS. And I know these numbers aren't random. These are decisions that we've made for our design, but they might feel random to somebody who is joining the project and is like, why was this 350 pixels? They don't know that I eyeballed it and thought 350 pixels looked nice. So if I create a variable and give it a name that says, maximum image width, it just makes it a bit more obvious to someone who's joining that that was a decision that I made rather than just a random number that I threw in there. So if you wanted, you could go back through your CSS and create a few more variables. You could What else could we do? Oh yes, we could go back and use our clamp. So we learned about clamp when we were first doing this big heading here. So clamp allowed us to set a maximum and minimum font size for this text here. So you could go back, because if we have a look at the About Me section, if I make this smaller, that gets a bit tiny, it's a bit ugly. So maybe we might want to use clamp on our heading 2 as well as on our heading 1. Yeah, there's a whole load of things we could do. You could, so now that you know about transitions, you could try doing some transitions on your buttons, maybe if you want the color to fade rather than change immediately. Yeah, a whole bunch of exciting things that we could do. One of the things that I find always, if I finish a project and I feel like I want to make it like real, giving my website a fav icon is something that always just adds that perfect finishing touch, in my opinion. And a fav icon is this little icon that we see along the top of our browser here. So websites tend to have a fav icon that is their logo, and we can make our own. A fav icon is usually a 16 by 16 pixel icon, and it's stored in either a GIF, PNG, or an ICO format. And there's a website that'll create fav icons for us. Icon generator, is this the one? Yes. favicon.io, I think that's the one I usually use. Yeah. So if you want to convert your design that you've made for your 16 by 16 pixel icon, you can then convert it into an icon. Why don't we do this right now? So if you go to favicon.io, .io, we're just going to make an emoji fav icon for now. So we're going to click on there. We're going to choose an emoji. My favorite emoji is the sparkle heart. So let's use the sparkle heart emoji. Come on, let me go. And it gives us the option to download. So if you've designed your own beautiful icon, you can absolutely use that. I'm going to click on download, which is going to give me a zip file. And inside of that zip file, it'll give you a whole bunch of different sized icons. And the reason why it does this is because different browsers on different devices use different icons. But for now, the only one that I'm interested in is the .ico file. So if you click on download, you get the zip file, extract the things from the zip file, and take just the .ico file. So it should say favicon.ico, and you're going to drag that into your project. I wonder if I can do that in the browser. Let's see what happened. Oh, it worked. That's exciting. And then the HTML that you want is this here. So we're going to take, we're going to add a link with a rel of icon, an href of favicon.ico, and a type of image /x icon. So that's going to go into our HTML. Let's jump into our index.html. In here, we're going to put in a link rel equals icon, href equals favicon.ico, and type equals image /x icon. And if you save that and refresh in your browser, you should see, it might take a while for the cache to clear. And if you're already hosted on GitHub, It might take even longer, but eventually your fav icon should show up in the tab there, which I always think is just such a nice finishing touch for your websites. And of course, as we learn our JavaScript throughout this course, we're going to make a couple of little apps, which we are then going to swap out for these project sections. So you're going to take a screenshot of your app, link to it on GitHub, give it a little description, and you'll be able to fill out your portfolio as we go, which hopefully will be useful to you in future. We spoke about different ways to host your site, and we spoke about GitHub pages. Colette, do you want to try and jump on again and see if we can fix your GitHub hosting? And does anybody have any other bugs or any other questions that they would like to ask so far? Or anything else they would like to know about their websites? These slides are obviously old because I don't think Heroku even exists anymore. Heroku, I think, moved to a paid platform, but there's one called Render now, which I've heard is good. I've not actually used it myself, but you could maybe try out Render if you want to move your projects to there. I also, of course, really love Glitch. So if you want to, you can actually, you can import directly from GitHub into Glitch. Oh, well done, pretty good. Good spotting. I have Firefox open now on my GitHub page. Okay, if I stop sharing, can you share your GitHub page? Let's see. No, oh, how frustrating. Can you send me a link to your GitHub repository and I can take a look at it that way, maybe? Sure. Or yeah, I mean, I'm going to open it. Yeah, you can send it here if you're comfortable with that, because I'm going to open it up in the browser and take a look. Aha, I see your problem. So so my handle is this is Jo Frank with the this is in it, but you don't need the this is part. That's just part of my GitHub handle. So you want to name it. I don't want to pronounce your surname incorrectly, but you want to rename it to be .github.io is what you want the name of your repository to be. So if you rename it to that, caps don't matter. In fact, you don't want caps. Cool. So now if we go to, there we go. I see your website. So Colette's website is now live. This is so cool. Love it. It's got the triangles. Oh my God, you've got your projects in here as well. Oh, this is so cool, Colette. Well done. Try your buttons. These oh, it's nice. Oh, I love it. Oh, we got some rounded corners on the photo as well. Oh, loving CodePen. Oh yes, CodePen is awesome. And we got a fab icon. Oh, this is just beautiful. Well done. Is anybody else feeling brave and want to share their URLs with me? This is the judgment-free zone. Everybody is awesome. Oh, everybody's gone very shy all of a sudden. Well, everybody, big applause to Colette. That's absolutely stunning. I guess we shall call it here if nobody else is feeling brave. On Wednesday, we're going to continue on with our JavaScript, and then we're going to start building the fun game that I keep promising that we keep not getting to, but I promise that we will. Yeah, I hope that JavaScript lesson wasn't too dry. I have tried coming up with fun ways to teach beginners JavaScript, and it's really just, you've just got to get the basics down, and then once you start using it, it feels better. So yeah, I haven't come up with an exciting way to teach beginners JavaScript yet, but bear with me, it will get fun. The next lesson we'll start having a look at functions, and we'll start looking at arrays and selectors in our JavaScript and actually putting stuff on the page. So spoilers for Wednesday, but yeah, I will see you all on Wednesday. Thank you so much for coming, as per usual.
Thank you, Jo. It was a great session, and well done, Colette. Your side. Okay, so see you all on Wednesday.
I will, let me get the links to all the previous slides as well, and I'll share them in the link. And if Patty could share the links to the YouTube where people can see the vids, that would be awesome as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, have a lovely evening, everybody. I'll see you on Wednesday.
Thank you, Jo. See you later. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.